If you came in wondering whether or not the Kraken could get their first win of the season on the second half of a back-to-back, you got your answer pretty quick. And the answer did not change as the night went on. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken predictably lose the second half of a back-to-back, and as a throwback to early on in the season, they do it by getting shut out in front of Philip Grubauer. And honestly, I don't think that there's much reason to spend a whole lot of time on this game. For one thing, it doesn't seem like the Kraken spent all that long on it themselves, and it was just kind of really boring. Everything happened all at once right at the start of the game in a less than 2-minute window, and that was all positive for the Wild and negative for the Kraken. And then the last 55 minutes of it just kind of happened. There wasn't any great chances. I mean, there's a couple good chances here and there, but nothing that was really highlight worthy other than you have to put a highlight pack together, so you gotta include something from the second and third period to show that they did in fact actually happen. But yeah, nothing particularly notable that you would have thought about if there had actually been some scoring that happened along the way. But outside those first couple minutes, well, the game ended there. Which, that description already by itself of one team making everything happen in the first 5 minutes and then nothing happening the rest of the way from there, even if you hadn't already seen the final score, would not bode very well for the Kraken. Since it was the second half of a back-to-back where coming into this game, they were already 0-10, and although things have been going generally well in first periods for a week or two there for the Kraken, well, the last game against the Blackhawks, the first period was easily their worst, and it still has not been a strength on the season as a whole. Their point differential, as TNT was happy to point out, is second worst in the league in the first period, and that just got worse in this game against the Wild. As the Kraken came out into the game looking every bit the team that was on the second half of a back-to-back, they were tired, lazy, and incredibly sloppy, especially in their own end of the ice. It kind of looked like they just took the wrong lessons out of the game in Chicago. Instead of learning from the way that they were able to take advantage of Chicago's mistakes, they instead seemed to look at the way that Chicago played that game as a way that they should play this one. And as a result, they get scored on 3 times in less than 2 minutes. Not right from the start of the game, but from goal 1 to goal 3, still pretty early on in the game. It's like a minute and a half between all 3 goals. It's the fastest from the start of a game, or the second fastest from the start of the game, that the Minnesota Wild have ever scored 3 goals, and also the fastest that any team has surrendered 3 goals this season. And I mean, sure, the Wild are a good team, or at the very least they're headed to the playoffs anyway. Actually, this exact moment in time when the Kraken just played them, they're maybe not all that good of a team. They're just incredibly injured, missing most of their best players, certainly their best scorers. And that has been evident here over this last stretch of 10 to 15 games where they've kind of just been treading water. And by treading water, that's happening entirely by not giving up goals, not by scoring them. They came into this game, I mean, colder than the vacuum of space when it came to scoring in the first period, and just scoring in general. They hadn't scored more than twice against a goaltender in a single game in quite some time. So for the Kraken to then give up 3 goals at 5-on-5 in less than 2 minutes, even if this is a team headed to the playoffs, it's not a team where there's any excuse, if there even is a team where there's an excuse, to give up goals that quickly against. And then again from there, nothing happened. It was incredibly boring for the final 55 minutes of the 60-minute game. You could have just turned the TV off at 3-0 and not missed anything of any kind of value. I mean, honestly, I think it was put best by Christopher over on Patreon, who said the Kraken just looked like a generic stand-in hockey team in a movie where the Wild are the protagonist. They're just one of those generic teams that the Wild beat on their way to whatever end goal they have. And not the team at the end where you have the close, exciting game. Not one of the teams that's just kind of a team you see for a couple seconds in a montage along the way. I think that's honestly about a perfect description of how the Kraken played this game. It was completely forgettable. But I suppose before we move on from this game entirely and try to forget about it, which shouldn't be very hard, we should at least talk in a little bit more detail about those 3 goals that the Kraken gave up as quickly as they did. Going into the game, it's pretty much the same lineup for the Kraken. I did forget that John Hayden stepped in for Cartier in the last game in Chicago, and that is still the case in this game. It's once again Hayden in that 4th line spot for the Kraken, and it's Grubauer in net, obviously, instead of Decord, second half of a back-to-back and all that. The Kraken actually get off to they at least get some pressure in the first couple minutes of the game, but then that collapse happens over a minute and a half. The Wild open up the scoring as the Kraken defensively just completely forget about Hartman in the middle of the ice. He skates into an empty spot, which happens to be the dead middle slot, gets a pass, fires off a shot, and with a bit of a screen in front of Grubauer, it just sneaks perfectly into the far bottom corner to give the Wild that 1-0 lead. And I mean, obviously, by looking at the screenshot, you don't need me to tell you that this is poorly played defensively, where Hartman has all of that space in the most dangerous area that he can shoot from. But in particular, it's a little bit odd that Brandon Montour, one of the two defensemen, is somehow that far above the play, though at least he, if you go back and watch the replay, which I can't show for copyright reasons, and we'll get to that in a video after the season, but he at least is covering a guy going up the boards, and that's how he ends up that high. Still, he could have come back down a little bit quicker to try and cover it off. Really, on this play, to me, it's Andrei Burakovsky, who just the entire time is just kind of coasting in a circle in the middle of the ice, puck watching, not doing anything of value, and sure enough, he just stands there with his stick in his hand, his jaw on the ground, as Hartman skates into the middle of where really he should be covering, and scores that goal. Meanwhile, for Grubauer's part in this, would it have taken a spectacular save for him to stop this one? I don't really think so, but it would have taken a pretty good save. And even if you do want to be critical of Grubauer letting this one in, he makes an even better save just a couple seconds later as the Wild are right back into the offensive end. Another wide open shot from the slot. Grubauer does come up with a pretty nice save on, but the Kraken unable to clear. The puck gets out to the boards, and somehow they completely forget that the slot exists for a third time in a row as the puck gets off the boards right out to Boldy, who fires off the shot, and this time it does beat Grubauer. You give them that many grade A plus opportunities, they're going to keep scoring, and sure enough, just like that, it's 2-0. Honestly, on this play, I'm not exactly sure who specifically should have been covering Boldy here. My gut says that it probably should have been Kakko, and he is the one that's kind of a bit behind him, trying to get up to stop that shot. Obviously, nowhere near close enough. But whether it's Kakko or one of the two defensemen, somebody needs to be covering the guy in the slot while you have three guys that were on the one on the boards, who, by the way, still manages to get this pass off to Boldy for the attempt. And honestly, of the three, this is the one to me that seems the most savable, but even still, it would have taken a pretty nice save again from Grubauer, who just, like I said, had a save not too terribly dissimilar from this one mere seconds before this. And again, the Wild, after scoring here to make it 2-0, are going to get right back into the offensive end with a whole new set of Kraken players on the ice, and a whole new set of problems that lead to the 3-0 score. And this time, just 30 seconds after the Wild make it 2-0, it's just some incredibly poorly executed neutral zone play by the Kraken that allows the very quick rush chance back the other way. Kind of a 2-on-1, though the Kraken still have two guys back that have at least a chance of breaking up this pass. Part of the problem is that they do both go for breaking up the pass by just waving their sticks in the passing lane and hoping for the best. I mean, I suppose at the very least, Cale Fleury does lay his body out to try and block it, but his stick is the only part that's really in the passing lane. He doesn't do a very good job really of trying to block the pass, and even on top of that, probably should have stayed over with the eventual goal scorer, who he did come into the zone with, covering that guy. Instead, he decides to go over to the other side to try and block the pass. Doesn't do a great job of it. It gets through to the guy that he left alone. Wide open. It gives absolutely no chance for Grubauer, and it's 3-0 Wild. Which, again, on that front, I think this goal in particular safely clears Grubauer of any blame for the outcome of this game, especially considering, even if you can talk your way into Grubauer should have made both of those first two saves, which, considering some of the saves he made between those, before and after them as well, it's hard to say that he should have made all of those saves. Even if you can get there, though, there's no way that he has any responsibility for this third goal, and then the Kraken proceed to do absolutely nothing about trying to come back and score even one themselves. They do maybe get one or two genuine scoring chances throughout the entire rest of the game, but, I mean, Gustafsson was locked in net, so it's not like they really got anything good enough or took his eyes away, got any traffic in front of the net. Once the Wild got their third goal, they pretty much just locked things down in their end of the ice. The Kraken really didn't do much to get through that defense aside from one really good chance for Adam Larsson late in the game, maybe midway through the third period. But at that point, 3-0, it's pretty late for finally getting one really good scoring chance. Either way, the Kraken, again, do absolutely nothing for giving Grubauer any kind of goal support. So even if he had made those two saves that were at least potentially savable. The one that wasn't was enough for the Wild to win this game because of the Kraken inability to make anything of value happen the other way. At least the good news is that the Kraken, for the first time in a while, don't pick up any points in the standings for this loss, which does help that whole race or chase for a better spot in the draft lottery order and eventually the draft itself, which, again, like I said, the schedule is going to get harder and harder. This is a very injured Wild team, so while, yeah, they are a team in a playoff spot, most of the rest of the teams the Kraken are going to play the rest of the way are not only in playoff spots, but also quite a bit more healthy than the Wild, especially at the top end of their rosters. So, yeah, if you're worried about the Kraken picking up too many points the rest of the way, at least the way they played this game, I wouldn't be terribly worried about it. If you wanted some other silver linings and a couple of things that went at least decently for the Kraken in this game, the one individual that I think had at least a passable performance in this game would be Shane Wright. He was one of 3 players, the fourth line with Azimont and Hayden as well, that weren't even a -1 in this game. Now, for Azimont and Hayden, it's just because they weren't on the ice a ton. That certainly was not the case for Wright, who played by far the most that he ever has in an NHL game. Nearly 20 minutes of ice time, which led the entire forward group for the Kraken, and it was only less than 3 defensemen. So finally, the Kraken are getting Wright some ice time. He had the most in the previous game, set his career high for ice time by those 2 seconds, 17 minutes and 42 seconds in the first half of the back-to-back. And now here in the second half, 6 seconds short, 19 minutes and 54 seconds. So just, 6 seconds short of 20 minutes of ice time. And like I said, he was definitely the best Kraken player. Again, overall, his game was kind of just slightly above average, but that made him the best Kraken player in this game, which isn't to say that really anybody had a particularly terrible game. The Kraken were just kind of across the board slightly bad in this game. A couple of players, like I pointed out, Andrei Burakovsky, Montour had a bad play there, Cale Fleury. There's a handful of players that didn't have great plays that were partially responsible for some of those goals early on, but all 3 of those goals came with different Kraken skaters out on the ice. Not a single Kraken skater was out for 2 of those 3 goals at the start of the game. There's a few that do end up -2 because of the empty netter at the end that makes it 4-0. But yeah, it was just kind of generally across the board, slightly bad performance by everybody. And then Shane Wright, who was slightly good, and in that way definitely stood out as the best skater for the Kraken in this game. And just by itself, the fact that he played nearly 20 minutes is, to me, a good thing coming out of this game. The other thing that went well was the Kraken penalty kill, which for the second time in 3 games was absolutely fantastic. I forgot to mention this in the video, and honestly, I feel really bad about forgetting to mention it because of how good it was, but they completely stifled the best penalty in the NHL by a wide margin in the Winnipeg Jets a couple games ago. Then they do have that fluky goal early on in the power play, the only power play for the Blackhawks in the first half of this back-to-back, and come out here against the Wild and, again, completely stifle them. I don't even think they let a shot on goal during the 2 power plays that the Wild had in the first period, which, considering that they'd already given up 3 goals at that point, did seem like quite a feat. But yeah, at least the penalty kill looked good in this game. Shane Wright looked good. And aside from that, the only other notable part about this game is that Chandler Stevenson did leave in the 3rd period, or maybe even late 2nd period. But either way, didn't return to the game for the Kraken, so hopefully that's nothing serious. And yes, obviously that is a big part of why Wright saw that huge jump in ice time. But at the same time, they chose to put Wright out there for Stevenson and fill a lot of those gaps with Shane Wright, rather than, say, Matty Beniers or any of the other Kraken players. They could have put McCann out there for more center time, but they chose to put Wright out there. He ends up with the most ice time of any forward, and I think that says a lot about the trust that they're putting in him and starting to finally give him these chances with a big load of ice time in a game. And now his 2 largest ice time games in the NHL so far came in back-to-back nights, and he was still the best Kraken after all of it. The best player in this game anyway. With that said, though, I think we can pretty much close the door on this one. There's not going to be 3 stars in this game for, I think, pretty obvious reasons. If you wanted to talk yourself into one, then it would be Shane Wright. He at least was the one watchable Kraken player for most of this game. Aside from Adam Larsson had a couple more pretty exciting offensive moments. And by pretty exciting, I mean, it at least made me go, oh, they could score. Oh, nope, they didn't. But, Larsson for a second game in a row was at least noticeable in the offensive end. But yeah, nothing that I think was necessarily worthy of a star, especially with the Kraken getting shut out yet again in front of Grubauer in the second half of a back-to-back, and now falling to 0-11 and 0 in the second half of back-to-backs on the season. They have just one more chance to at least get a win or a point even in these games. If that doesn't happen, though, well, it certainly will be a big part of the story that we look back on why the Kraken didn't make the playoffs, because they just could not play a second day straight. But as always, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below about this game. If you have any beyond what I've shared, honestly, I'm really kind of scratching and clawing to try and find something to say about this game. It was that incredibly dull. But let me know what you think down in the comments, and until next time, stay safe out there. Be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken.